one of them a question, one of them just to elaborate, required elaboration from you a little bit. We just came back from Jerusalem and Greece recently. Some of the people here were with us. I saw, obviously with our own eyes, the deacons from the Greek Orthodox Church, as they are going through the procession in the Sepulchre, would raise incense to the Coptic Orthodox Metropolitan in front of their Patriarch Theophilus, which is a great sign. That was so beautiful to see. And amongst the clergy there, Greek Orthodox, Serbian and others, the reception was very beautiful. It was very, very nice. Thank God for that.
Good news, yes.
Greece was also beautiful until we arrived in the area of Mount Athos, which I found was very confronting, to say the least. I don't know why. Is it because of what you were saying earlier, the not wanting to enter into the dialogue? I'm not sure about that area. It's a bit vague for me. And the second question, separate, is to clarify to everyone the process of baptism, anointing of the chrismation, and the Eucharist for a child in the Eastern Orthodox Rite, how it happens.
Well, I begin again to answer the second question. So for this again, I invite you to read the texts about baptism in the Oriental and Eastern Orthodox traditions, because of course in your Oriental Orthodox traditions the text would differ in words in the Coptic, Ethiopian, Syrian Orthodox and Ethiopian traditions. But again, what is happening is exactly the same, you know, that you have the time when you plunge the babies, and we do plunge them. It's not just a sparkling of some drops of holy water. So we keep, all of us, we keep this tradition. We have the unction with the Miron. So I would say there is no difference. Just the texts may differ in words, but not in the acts, you know. And I would come back to the Ethiopian tradition, because I think this is somehow unique today, but we must think seriously about what they do, because I remember once in Addis Ababa I went for a baptism, and as they begin very early, maybe 5 or 6 in the morning, they begin the liturgy, but they do the baptism just before the liturgy, so you go for baptism at 4 in the morning. The same, by the way, for a wedding. Why? Because they do it like in the old church, you know, that once you get baptized and chrismated, that is, you receive the confirmation, immediately you should go to liturgy and receive communion. Immediately after baptism. And the same for the new couple. They are united by the sacrament of wedding, and immediately, so the wedding takes place at 4 in the morning, they will go for liturgy. You know, they are in the same church, they stay for the liturgy and receive the sacraments of Eucharist just after being married. So this is, I think, very strong. And in fact, in some of our parishes in Switzerland, in Paris, where I go very often, we come back to that. And we have, the priest will make the sacrament of baptism just before the liturgy, so that the baby can receive communion immediately. And, well, we have not come yet to having weddings before the liturgy, but you see, they are right to do it so. About Mount Athos, I cannot go because I'm a woman, as you know, as you see, but I know people who go there regularly. And we always speak of the non-ecumenical spirit of Mount Athos, but people told me, even recently, that you should not put all the monks of Mount Athos in the same basket, as we say in French, And I know that, for instance, the monks of Simonos Petras, where they have very educated monks, they would not call you monophysites. They know because they have received Coptic bishops, priests, and also people and clergy from the other Oriental churches. And so they know that you follow the Christology of Saint Cyril of Alexandria, who is also a church father for the Eastern Orthodox churches. So, yes, you may find some very holy monk, you know, who is a great ascetic man living maybe in a cave somewhere on Mount Athos, but maybe who never had a chance to read your liturgical books, you know, or other texts of your church, have never really have had a dialogue with people of your Oriental Orthodox churches, so they are very strict. They think that they have to defend orthodoxy and the Orthodox faith, and well, so they can be sometimes, I don't know how to say that, but yes, they would call you monophysite. But I think I had a good surprise, you know, in Bielorussia, which is also under the Patriarchate of Moscow, that is very conservative. I met a young priest last year, and he said, oh, I know that the Copts, etc., the Oriental Orthodox are not monophysite. And I was very surprised. And I said, how do you know that? And he said, oh, because our professor explained to us they are not monophysite. And I said, well, who is your professor, etc.? Oh, well, he read a book, you know, I cannot remember who was the, I said, which book? I cannot remember the author. And then he saw my name, he said, it's your book, it's this book, which was translated 20 years ago into Russian and put, you know, when it was out of print, they put it on internet, so anybody can read it for free. So you see, after 20 years, this professor in Minsk, Belarus, happened to find this book on internet and was convinced, and I have never met him, you see, and suddenly something came out. So we must pray, I think. We must pray, and I think whenever you go to Greece, or, well, maybe sometimes it's not very healthy, you know, when you come into theological discussions, because these discussions can become disputes. So instead of dialogue, you know, you will feel aggressed, and the other person may be aggressive, or etc. So I think sometimes it's better not to say anything and to pray and to let the Holy Spirit work in our hearts and minds. But I think it's always good to inform the people, because in 1985 I had organized what I call the philoxenia, that is, you know, an encounter with, sisterhood. I had convinced Pope Shenouda and Amba Bishoy that 2 nuns of San Damiana would come to Greece and visit about 12 convents. So they came, and I came from Geneva with my little car to meet them in Greece, and we went to visit these Greek Orthodox convents. So I remember in the very well-known convent of Ormilia, which is near Thessaloniki, and the spiritual father comes from Mount Athos, from Simonos Petras. So there are women outside Mount Athos, but they are under Mount Athos. And I had discovered myself in that time that all the troparia, what they call troparia in Greek, all these special songs and texts for every great festival. And the main and most famous is Christos Anesti for Easter, which you have kept in Greek language words until today, But it's not only for Christos Anesti for Easter. All the great festivals, you have these Greek troparia. And so when I discovered this, I said to the Coptic nuns, please, in every convent, please sing these songs. And so they did, and I tell the story of what happened in this convent of Ormilia. So the superior mother, Igumena, she listened to them. She was so surprised. And then I discovered you sing I did not know before the trip to Greece, that you have the monogenes, which you sing on Good Friday, kept word by word in Greek language. And they sang the monogenes, and we had given the Coptic book, to this mother. And when they finished, the mother said, you pray the monogenes, which is used in our liturgy, Eastern Orthodox liturgy, anaphora of St. John Chrysostom, every Sunday, and speaking of Christ, as God and incarnate, that is human. It's clearly said in that prayer. So the mother was so astonished, and she said, you sing the monogenes, but you are Orthodox? So you see, sometimes you need a little click, we say in French, and the new world opens up, you see. So sometimes, I encourage you to sing the monogenes and the Christos Anesti when you go again visit Greece or Greek churches and parishes, including in Australia, where you have many Greek parishes, including, of course, in Sydney.
My name is James. I'm an Australian, but I'm born in a Coptic man's body. And being raised in the Coptic church, there was one thing that was repeated to me when we had learnt about church history and church fathers and the councils and stuff like that, is that Nestorius was a big heretic. And as I've come to mature and read a bit more, I've read a perspective that Nestorius was actually misunderstood and wasn't trying to say that that Saint Mary is more the mother of Christ and not sort of, he didn't want to give that divinity status to Saint Mary. Now, is the issue of Nestorius the same type of misunderstanding that the Oriental and Eastern Orthodox churches are facing, or is this completely different?
Well, I'm not a specialist of Nestorius, I must say. When I was giving my general talk, I was mentioning these missionaries who went to India and up to China in the 7th century. So this was done by monks of the Church of the East. And this is the church which was labeled as Nestorian. In fact, we have met this afternoon some people of this church who visited your Coptic parish. I think you have invited here their bishop, I heard, and also he spoke about their Christological faith. So I think it's better to listen to the DVD or what you have, from this meeting, because you will have a direct answer from somebody of the Church of the East. And about your question, is it similar, to these misunderstandings between the Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox? In fact, it's just the opposite, because with the Oriental Orthodox, they were labeled as monophysite because they thought that the humanity of Christ was swallowed by his divinity, that is having just one physis or one nature. And for the Nestorians, it's just the opposite, because they speak of yes, two natures, but they have a a Syriac word, knoma, knome, if it's singular or plural, you know, speaking of persons, and they spoke of two persons. So this was considered also as heretic, you know, that's why they were banned by the other Christians. But I advise you to read on internet the article written by Dr. Sebastian Brock from Oxford called A Lamentable Misnomer. This is about the name Nestorian, you know. So you will see there in detail what he, as a great expert, of course, of Syriac language, he explains about this topic. And again, well, what we can compare between these two types of churches and dialogues is that we can speak of a misunderstanding, you know, in the word physis in the context of the Oriental Orthodox. It's not one physis, it's a composite physis of divinity and humanity. And the same could be said about this word knoma, knome, which were translated, but you see it's Syriac. So how to translate this correctly into English and then into other languages? And so the scholars of Syriac, I'm not a scholar of Syriac language, well, they explain to us that in fact also we have to understand what they really mean by these two words, knoma, knome, you know, which can be also understood as two natures. But it's so complex, you know, because these languages have specificities, and it's very difficult to have just one word to translate, you know, a Gez word, or that is Ethiopian or Syriac word, you know, and it's where sometimes you need to have different words to explain one word, and of course more even words to explain a full expression, and you have to see that in a whole context, also in the context of the writings of the fathers of the Church of the East, because somebody like called Babai in the Church of the East, he has also explanations which are quite clear about the question. So you should not only relate to the 5th century texts, but also study the Christology of the Church of the East in the following centuries and until today. And this is why I think it's very interesting to have also the help of some scholars, you know, who know the languages very well, like Syriac, Arabic, Gez, etc., because they are not always theologians, so they don't have prejudice, and they care only for the best translation possible. So I think that the theologians of our churches, they need also help of these academics, of these scholars knowing very well the languages, to understand the nuance of these names, of these words in different languages, either Syriac, Gez, etc., you know. So I would leave the question open. And this is the way, I think, of having dialogue, you know, to leave things open. If we don't understand today something, maybe somebody will explain another time, and then we understand better, or we leave it on the side, and again, after some time, maybe we read a book. It happens to me all the time, something I have not understood, and suddenly, some months later, I read something else, you know, and I have my answer for a question I kept in my mind. So this must encourage us again to read and study, etc. So I encourage you also to read and study as much as possible. and speak with these people, you know. And of course, not all men, very few have studied theology, so maybe they don't always explain properly, you know. Maybe they will not have the perfect explanation, so don't be too hard, you know, and don't ask only one person, but try to have the best information from the best specialists. This is my recommendation.